President Trump's going to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and move our embassy there. Joining us, Senator Pat Toomey, Republican from Pennsylvania. Mr. Senator, the reaction to this in the Arab world is one of extraordinary hostility. Days of rage planned on Friday by Muslims in around Jerusalem, and the Pope says don't do it. He'd rather have the status quo. Will that kind of hostility bleed over into our domestic policy? Will it affect President Trump's domestic growth agenda?
I very much doubt it. I think most people on the Hill understand that every single country in the world gets to choose its own capital except one, and that's Israel. And it's long overdue for Israel to be able to have the rest of the world recognize Jerusalem as its capital, as we recognize the capital cities around the world. So this may create some controversy in the Arab world. I certainly hope it doesn't become an excuse for certainly any violence. But it's the right thing to do, and I'm glad President Trump is doing it.
Can I ask you about tax reform, specifically about the state and local tax deduction, SALT, that deduction? At the moment, it's supposed to be no deduction whatsoever, except for maybe $10,000 for your property taxes. I hear movement from California Republicans and from Steve Scalise, whip of the House, that maybe you could implement this on a rolling basis. So you don't get rid of the entire deduction immediately. You get rid of it over a period of years. Maybe, is that possible?
So, Stuart, I think it's likely that there will be some changes to SALT, but it'd be premature for me to suggest exactly what form the change takes. You're correct. What we've done in both the House and the Senate bill is to disallow the deduction of state and local taxes with the exception of up to $10,000 in property taxes. We're probably going to have to tweak that in order to hold the votes that we need in the House. But it could be tweaked in a number of ways, and it has not yet been determined which way. That would be quite a change, because one of the most profound impact from this tax deal is the removal of that state and local tax deduction. That will have an enormous impact on New Jersey, New York, California. A lot of people are going to leave. This would have a big impact. It could. It's also a very important source of the revenue that allows us to lower marginal rates for everybody and to make our code a better code. You know, the deduction for state and local taxes really amounts to a subsidy by low tax states for high tax states. And even within a state, it means lower tax jurisdictions within a state end up subsidizing the higher tax jurisdictions. So to the extent that we disallow that deduction, it allows us to lower marginal rates further. That trade-off is good policy. So I hope we'll be able to preserve as much of the disallowance of that deduction as possible. But I recognize there'll have to be some give. Yesterday, there was the scene with President Trump sitting down to lunch. Senator Jeff Flake was sitting right next to him. Within hours, Senator Flake had written a check for $100 to the Democrat there he is, sitting right next to the president. He wrote a check for $100 to the Democrat in the Alabama race. What do you say to this, Senator? Well, I was a little surprised, but what's much more important to me is that Jeff Flake voted in favor of our tax reform bill. And when we come out of conference with the modifications we'll need, I'm very optimistic that Senator Flake will vote for that as well. That's what counts. Signed by Christmas Eve? I hope so, and I think there's a real good shot at it. Okay. Senator Toomey, thanks as always for joining us, and may I apologize yet again for all the hard times I've given you in the last few months about whether you get it done or not. Not at all. You've been skeptical, Stuart, but we're getting there, aren't we? Yes, sir. It looks like it. Yes, sir. Yeah. Senator Toomey, thanks for joining us, sir. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Yes, sir.